Havana, Cuba, December 1946. Inside a guarded hotel suite, Meyer Lansky sat with America's most powerful crime bosses, dividing territories without a single document. No records, no witnesses. What they agreed on that night would quietly shape the underworld for decades. The official story speaks of gangs and street violence, but by then a quieter system was already in place, built on money, control, and distance. Lansky didn't command attention. He designed structure. What happened in Havana wasn't just a meeting. It was a blueprint for power that didn't need to be seen. If you value real underworld history built on documented events, consider subscribing. Before the Mafia, the Lower East Side economy, New York City, early 1900s. The Lower East Side is packed with tenements, pushcarts, and new arrivals trying to survive in a city that offers little protection. Work is scarce, wages are low, and the law rarely reaches into these crowded streets in any meaningful way. In that gap, a different system begins to take shape. Young men, many of them children of Jewish immigrants, organize themselves into small but disciplined crews. At first, it's simple: protection for local businesses, control over street markets, small theft operations, but it doesn't stay small for long. What separates these groups from the chaotic street gangs seen elsewhere is structure. Money is tracked, roles are defined, risk is managed. Figures like Arnold Rothstein begin to shift the model. He doesn't operate like a street enforcer. He operates like a financier. Gambling operations expand, backed by careful accounting and controlled odds. Corrupt police officers are paid regularly, not occasionally. Judges are approached through intermediaries. Every expense is treated as part of the business. By the 1920s, during Prohibition, this system grows into something far larger. Alcohol distribution requires supply chains, storage, transportation, and protection at every step. The Lower East Side crews adapt quickly. They build networks that move product across boroughs and state lines. What begins as survival turns into enterprise. Long before the Italian Mafia becomes the public face of organized crime in America, the foundation is already there, quietly built in these streets, where crime is no longer random. It's organized, calculated, and designed to last. Murder Incorporated, the corporate arm of crime. New York, 1930s. By now, organized crime is no longer a loose collection of gangs. It is a system, and every system needs enforcement. Not emotional, not reckless, controlled, predictable, efficient. That role is filled by what later becomes known as Murder Incorporated. Operating primarily out of Brooklyn, this group is not tied to a single neighborhood or ethnicity. It answers to a higher structure, one that includes both Jewish and Italian leadership. Figures like Louis Lepke Buchalter and Albert Anastasia oversee a network of contract killers who function less like street criminals and more like employees. The process is direct. A decision is made at the top. A name is passed down. Payment is agreed. The job is assigned. There is no personal motive, no argument, no escalation. Just execution. What makes this system different is not the violence, it's the organization behind it. Hits are scheduled, travel is arranged, weapons are provided, alibis are considered. The same group can carry out orders in New York, Detroit, or Chicago without disruption. Violence becomes a service, one that enforces discipline across the entire network. Debts are collected, betrayals are answered, disputes are settled without open war. For the first time, organized crime in America operates with something close to corporate efficiency. Decision-making at the top, execution at the bottom, and in between, a structure designed to keep everything running without noise. It's not chaos anymore. It's management. The Syndicate model. Luciano, Lansky, and the boardroom of crime. By the early 1930s, the violence that once defined organized crime in New York had become a liability. Constant conflict disrupted business, drew police attention, and weakened profits. The solution came from a shift in thinking. Less street control, more structure. Charles "Lucky" Luciano reorganized the Italian mafia into separate families with defined territories. But the real stability came from partnership. Meyer Lansky, already known for his discipline and financial precision, helped shape a system that treated crime like a coordinated enterprise rather than a collection of rival gangs. Together, they built what became known as the Syndicate. It wasn't a formal organization with paperwork or offices. It was a framework. Disputes were settled through discussion, not gunfire. Operations were divided by specialty: gambling, loan sharking, labor rackets, distribution. Each group handled its role, but profits and decisions flowed upward. Money was tracked carefully. Investments were made across cities. If a problem emerged in one area, it could be contained without collapsing the entire network. Violence still existed, but it was controlled, used only when necessary to maintain order. For the first time, organized crime in America operated with a kind of internal governance. It had leadership, structure, and long-term planning. And at the center of it was a quiet understanding. This system only worked if everyone followed the rules. What had once been a collection of street operations was now something more stable, more coordinated, and far more difficult to dismantle. For more breakdowns of how these systems worked behind the scenes, subscribe. Money Without Borders, Cuba, Casinos, and Political Access. As pressure inside the United States increased, expansion became necessary. The answer wasn't to retreat, it was to move outward. Beyond domestic law enforcement, beyond direct oversight, Cuba became central to that strategy. In the 1940s and 1950s, Havana offered something rare: a government willing to cooperate, and an economy open to outside investment. Meyer Lansky and his associates worked directly with Cuban leadership, including Fulgencio Batista, to develop casinos, hotels, and entertainment venues. But these weren't just businesses. They were financial systems. Casinos generated large volumes of cash, and cash created flexibility. Earnings could be adjusted before being officially recorded. Ownership could be layered through partnerships and front companies. Money could move across borders with minimal resistance. The structure was deliberate. Profits flowed in from American tourists, but much of the real value came from how that money was handled after it entered the system. This expansion was not informal or isolated. It was coordinated at the highest level. The 1946 meeting in Havana brought together major crime figures from across the United States to align interests, reduce conflict, and plan international operations. For a time, it worked. Havana became more than a destination. It became a financial extension of the American underworld, one that operated with protection, access, and distance. The government deal, war, intelligence, and quiet alliances. During World War II, the relationship between organized crime and the U.S. government shifted in a way that was rarely acknowledged publicly. It was not based on ideology. It was based on necessity. American ports were critical to the war effort. Ships carried supplies, equipment, and personnel. Any disruption, whether sabotage or labor unrest, posed a serious risk. But control over the docks didn't fully belong to the government. It belonged to the people who already operated there. Through union influence and established networks, organized crime figures held leverage that law enforcement alone couldn't easily replicate. Rather than confront that reality directly, authorities chose a different approach: cooperation through intermediaries. Charles Luciano, serving time in New York, became part of these arrangements. His connections could stabilize the waterfront, reduce risk, and ensure smoother operations. In exchange, pressure eased. Eventually, he was released and deported. Details of these agreements were not formally public at the time, and some aspects remain debated. But independent historical analysis and institutional research confirm that organized crime played a role in wartime security efforts, including connections explored in depth by the Mob Museum. The significance of this moment goes beyond the war itself. It shows something deeper: that the boundary between criminal power and state power is not always fixed. Sometimes it shifts when both sides need something the other already controls. Las Vegas. From desert to laundering machine, Las Vegas did not rise by accident. After World War II, it offered something rare: legal gambling, weak oversight, and distance from financial centers under growing scrutiny. For organized crime, it wasn't just opportunity, it was a solution. Investment moved in quietly from networks based in New York, Chicago, and beyond. Some funds appeared legitimate: loans, partnerships, development deals. The rest moved through intermediaries and layered ownership structures designed to hide who was actually in control. Meyer, Lansky, and others saw casinos as more than businesses. They were systems that could reshape money. Gambling produced constant cash, and cash allowed flexibility. Earnings could be adjusted, reduced on record, or moved without clear origin. Inside the casinos, operations were tightly controlled. Every table and transaction was tracked. But alongside official accounting ran another process: the skim. Before profits were recorded, a portion was quietly removed. That money never entered the books. It moved through couriers back to those who financed the operation. Italian crews handled enforcement and pressure on the ground. Financial control stayed distant, managed by people who rarely appeared where risks were highest. Las Vegas became more than a destination. It became a financial system, one that turned illegal earnings into something that looked legitimate. To the public, it was entertainment. Behind it, it was money being cleaned at scale. The crackdown: hearings, surveillance, and fracture. By the 1960s, the system that had operated quietly for decades was no longer invisible. Organized crime began to be understood not as isolated gangs, but as a coordinated national structure. Profitable, organized, and deeply rooted. Public exposure changed everything. Senate hearings brought hidden operations into the open, forcing officials to confront what had long been denied. Names once spoken only in private were now part of public record. Organized crime was no longer rumor. It was documented. At the same time, law enforcement methods advanced. Electronic surveillance became more effective. Listening devices found their way into homes, offices, and social clubs. Conversations that once carried no risk were now evidence. Information that once took years to uncover could be gathered quickly and used in court. Legal strategy shifted as well. Prosecutors began targeting entire networks rather than individuals. Financial records, communication patterns, and testimony were combined to build broader cases. Inside the system, the response was cautious but uneven. Those working behind the scenes, financial planners, intermediaries, began pulling back from visibility. Distance became protection. Italian crime families, more closely tied to public activity and enforcement, absorbed most of the attention. Arrests and trials followed, weakening leadership and disrupting coordination. The system didn't collapse all at once. It fractured. Communication slowed, authority weakened, and without centralized control, the structure that once operated with precision began to lose its balance. For the first time, the greatest risk wasn't conflict, it was exposure, disappearance, or transformation. By the 1970s, and more clearly into the 1980s and 1990s, the public perception was that organized crime in America was fading. High-profile trials, long prison sentences, and new laws created the appearance of a system being dismantled piece by piece. Headlines focused on arrests, courtrooms became the stage where power seemed to unravel. But what changed most was not the existence of the system. It was its form. The methods developed over decades did not depend on any single group or visible structure. They were adaptable. Money still needed to move, risk still needed to be managed, profit still needed to be protected. The difference was how those functions were carried out. Instead of relying on identifiable organizations, operations became more dispersed. Financial activity shifted into areas that appeared legitimate: real estate development, import-export businesses, consulting firms, investment partnerships. Ownership structures grew more layered, often crossing multiple jurisdictions, making direct connections difficult to establish. International banking systems played a larger role. Funds could move across borders quickly, passing through accounts that obscured origin and destination. Shell companies replaced the storefronts and front businesses of earlier decades. On paper, everything appeared structured and lawful. Language changed as well. Terms associated with organized crime faded, replaced by neutral or professional descriptions. What had once been called a racket could now be framed as a service. What had been hidden in cash could now move through formal financial channels. Many individuals who had been directly involved stepped away from visible roles or shifted into positions that attracted less scrutiny. The system no longer needed strong personalities at the center. It relied on processes. From the outside, it looked like decline. But in practice, it was a transition. From a visible network to a quieter, more integrated one. The structure did not disappear. It learned how to exist without being easily recognized. The bottom line: power without visibility. By the end, the noise fades. No more public bosses, no more open control of streets or casinos. What remains is quieter, harder to point to, and far more difficult to measure. The system that once relied on visible power learned to operate without it. The real shift wasn't the end of organized crime. It was its absorption into structures that already existed. Finance, real estate, international business, places where money moves constantly and questions are rarely asked if everything appears legitimate. What Goodfellas showed was the surface. Violence, loyalty, betrayal. What it missed was the system underneath. The planning, the money flow, the relationships that didn't need attention to survive. So the question isn't whether it ended, it's whether it simply changed form. If power can exist without visibility, how would anyone recognize it today? And if the system never truly disappeared, where is it operating now? For more stories that uncover what history leaves out, consider subscribing.